Hi everyone, and welcome to this chapter of the free full stack course. In this chapter, we're going to talk about custom user models in Django, and then we're going to extend it to Django REST framework in order to allow our users to log into our system using their email and password. If you remember previously, when we created a super user in order to modify our database and actually add data to our database, we created a super user with a username and a password. However, since the project that we're working with at the moment is going to evolve into some sort of an e-commerce application that we're going to later create with Flutter and Rust, we want users to be able to register with their email addresses and a password combination. So we cannot have username and password combinations, which is actually the default for Django user models. So before we get into changing this, I need to tell you that this chapter is actually going to be a little bit scary in that we're going to pretty much drop the entire database that we've created so far. However, thankfully, we haven't actually manipulated our database so much that we have to be scared of, okay, losing so much data. We've just created two categories, electronics, I think it was, and then we went in there and added another category for cell phones, and in there we then added some, I think actually two products, one a OnePlus telephone and another one an iPhone with 4 images, and we got those images from Best Buy's website, if you remember. So what we need to do is to first have a look at what a user model is in Django. So I'll explain it as much as is necessary, because there's so much to explain about user models that I think if we want to really dig into it, it will take probably a whole course just to talk about user models in Django. But what you need to know is that when you create a new project, then Django uses a specific type of backend for your user models, and a user model in itself is pretty much just a model object. Just like we created a product or a product category and a maker model object, then a user object is also pretty much a model object. However, the default user object for Django, it relies on a username and a password combination. What we want is to create a custom user object that uses email and password combination. And in order to do that, you need to not only create a user a model object, but you also need to create a manager object that saves those user instances to the database and can retrieve them from the database. And also we will have to basically change the whole way that Django recognizes and uses its user models. And we will do that in the settings Python file. So for now, that is enough information, I think, about user models. And there's also really good documentation available on Django's website. And you can see it is called Substitute a Custom User Model. And you can search for this and then plus Django in Google or your favorite search engine in order to find it. But you will find information about how to do that, and also information about how to set up a new project with a new user model. Even in the documentation, it is specified that if you want to change the user model mid-project, it is going to be quite a difficult task, because you're going to get some errors, some foreign keys may be hooked to your old user models that no longer are valid. So what we are doing right now is actually this hard way of going about doing it. And this was something that I had actually planned, because I wanted us to have a look a little bit on migrations, how they work, and why is it that changing a user model mid-project is actually quite a difficult task. And the other reason that we're doing it now rather than in the beginning is that I didn't want to convolute this whole course talking about user models from the absolute beginning, because I assumed basically that we didn't know any Django from beginning, and going and digging into user models from the absolute beginning of the project is something that most people don't want to do if they're complete beginners to Django. You probably want to do this. You want to go ahead and create a new project with a custom user model if you're already familiar with Django. However, my assumption was that nobody watching this course was already familiar with Django. So we're gonna do it the hard way. However, my recommendation for you is that if you're creating a new Django project, then create your custom user model from the beginning by following the instructions in this particular tutorial on Django's website. So let's close this and let's bring up our project. So I'm gonna bring our course backend in here, as you can see. Okay, So what we need to do first is to go ahead and create a new application. In that application, we're going to start at creating our user model and the manager. So you need to get into this habit of working with applications when you're in Django. So you see, you would probably think that, oh, okay, but we already have like an application called products, and that this guy already has models. Can't we not just go in here and add a user model? Well, you could. However, it would be really strange to the rest of your product, or to the rest of this whole solution, if your user model was residing inside the products application. The products application has a duty of working with only products and, for instance, categories and makers. So it is responsible for retrieving products, for instance, for us, and also providing the views for those things, basically. However, it shouldn't really know anything about a user model. It shouldn't have to manage user model. So the most rational solution here is to go ahead and create a completely new application that we're going to call it, for instance, users. And in there, we're going to create our user model. Okay, so get into the habit of thinking logically about your model objects and where they should reside. If you're creating a model object for which you don't have an application yet, then go ahead and create an application just like we're going to do now. So I'm going to close this and let's bring up our terminal. Excuse me. In the terminal, ensure that your virtual environment is activated. You see in here it says venv, and this is something that Visual Studio Code automatically does, as we saw in the previous video when we created a virtual environment with Visual Studio Code. So even if I close this terminal and create a new one, actually I can delete it and create a new one. You can see its sources are this activate script in here, which activates our virtual environment. Okay, so let's go ahead as the first thing and create a users application. So we're going to say Python manage.py, and then we're going to say start app, and we're going to call it users. Okay, and now if you go to the Explorer, you can see there is a completely new application in here called users. Okay, and it has apps, models, test views, etc., etc. Now, the first thing that we need to do is to go ahead and create something called a manager. And this is going to be our user manager. Now, you're not probably familiar with this already, but there's really good documentation in the same URL that I provided for you on how to create user manager objects. So this manager object is going to be responsible for creating new users. Okay, so the user model is one thing, and the manager is the one that actually manages the user models and creates them in the database. With just the user model, your application just won't work because you just have the model object. You have to kind of bring it to life with the manager. Okay, we usually call them user managers. So in the Django world, they're just called user managers. Okay, now there are two types of users in Django. One is just a normal user. Let's say that any user of our solution that wants to buy some products from us comes in and wants to register a user with an email and a password. That will be a simple user. And then there's another kind of users that we have to take care of, which are called super users. And if you remember, this is how we created them. Python manage create super user. And that's not what we're going to do right now. I just want to bring up that we have normal users and we also have super users. So this user manager, it needs to ensure that it can create not only normal users, but it should also be able to create super users. Okay, so let's get rid of this terminal in here, and then let's go to our Explorer inside users application. Let's go and create a new file in here and call it managers.py. So right click, new file, and we say managers.py. Okay, in this managers, we're going to create a new base user manager. So the class that we're going to extend from is called base user manager, and it comes from Django, contrib, auth, models, import base user manager. Okay, and this is something, I mean, I'm not making it up. This is something that you learn if you just read the documentation on user management for Django. However, we're not going to spend too much time looking at the documentation. I'm just going to show you how you need to do this task. Okay, what we need to do is to create a custom class in here, and we're going to call it class, and we say custom user manager. Okay, and this is something that I've just made up, because later on we're going to go ahead and create a user class, which we're going to call custom user. So it's user manager could be called custom user manager. However, you could call it anything in here. You could just say anything manager, okay? And it wouldn't really make any difference. However, it's nice to take your user, take what you're going to call your user model object later, which we're going to call custom user, and add manager to it just for the sake of clarity. Okay. And then in Python, we say this is extending base user manager in here. Okay. So there are two functions that you need to create in here. One is called create user, and the other one is called create super user. Okay. And these, two functions, they need to take 4 arguments. One is self, because, well, these are instance methods, and this is something that we do in Python. So if we say def blah and we say self in here, this becomes a method for this particular class. Okay, so the first function is going to be called create user, and the other one is going to be create super user. So let's go in here and say create super user like this. All right. The second parameter to these is going to be the actual email address that we have for our users. Okay, so we say we need an email, and then we have a password that's none by default. Okay, and then the last argument and the fourth argument is going to be our the rest of the arguments. And this is something that we do in Python with something we call KW-args or something. And you can also specify them like extra fields or something like this. And this means pretty much we need email and password, and then anything else that comes in, we're just gonna accept it, okay? So in here, we need to do one thing first. We need to ensure that email is passed to us. So we say email is actually a required field. So we say if email is not there, and then we're gonna raise a value error. So value error, okay? And we just say users must have an email address. So this is actually a good suggestion by GitHub Copilot. Then what we need to do is to go ahead and normalize this email, because base user manager actually has a function you can see called normalize email, and you can see that it lowercase the domain part of the email. Okay, so let's go ahead and normalize it. So we say email is email, self.normalize email. All right. After doing that, we need to go ahead and create a user from this email. All right. The next thing that we're going to do in here is to create a new user. So this is going to be the actual creation of the user. So we create a variable called user, and then we refer to self.model. And this is something that will be populated by Django automatically when it knows what model object we're using for this particular manager. So you don't have to worry about this. This is just a property. You can see in the base user manager, you can see model in here. Let's see, self model. You can see it in here. Okay, so you don't have to worry about actually setting this. It will be set automatically by Django when we specify our user model later in settings.py. Okay, so just know that whatever model object that we are going to specify soon for our project is going to be in here. So we say self.model, we create a new instance of it by providing our email and then the extra arguments into it. Okay, then there is a function for this user, which is called set password, I believe, set password. Okay, and then we pass the password to it. And then we say user save using self.database. All right, and then we can say return user. I mean, not that we can say, we actually should do it like this. All right. After doing this, we need to go ahead and create a super user. So the super user creation is very similar to how we create a normal user in here. The only difference is that the create super user needs to work basically with the create user function. So create super user needs to delegate a task to create user. So let's go ahead in here and copy these parameters. We go in here, okay, we paste them in there, and we say we first create a user by saying user is self create user, and we pass all these 3 arguments in there because this is the one actually creating the user for us, the create user. However, by creating a super user, we have to set 2 additional arguments on it. And this is just how Django works. This is not something that I'm making up on the spot. You have to add 2 separate parameters to this user. One is that is a staff member. So we say is a staff, okay? And then we say is super user is true. Okay, and these are just some things that have historically been the case for user models in Django, in that you have to set these 2 properties, because base user models, as we're going to soon create them, they have these properties. Okay, And after setting these two properties, all we really have to do is to save this user, because you see, create user function already saves this user. However, by specifying the value for two new properties for this user, we need to ensure that these two new properties are also saved in the database. So we can just copy the code that we wrote in here and just return the same user from here. Okay, so let's go in here and say user.save using self.db, and then pretty much just save the user. Okay. So that part was how we create our manager. The next part is to create the user model itself. So this guy takes care of the creation of the user, but we need to actually create the model for the user, which is being used in here. Okay. And the way to do that is that we go into our Explorer and then into models of the user's application. And then we need to create a custom user, because in here we said custom user manager. So it'd be really nice if our model object was also called custom user. So let's say we have a class and we call it custom user, and you need to basically ensure that it comes from an existing model object somewhere that an existing user model object as defined, you need to basically extend it. Okay, so in here you usually go ahead and say abstract base user. All right, and this abstract base user comes from Django. So we say from Django, I think it's contrib auth models, import abstract base user. And then we need to also ensure that it has default permissions already set on it. And the way to do that is to go ahead and use the permissions mixin. So import that as well. So we say permissions mixin, okay? And in here we say permissions mixin. And there's so much information that I can give you about these things, which I think at the moment by doing that, it will be just too much information. Just know that for now all you need to know is that a custom user model needs to come from an existing user model. And the simplest way to do that is to use this abstract base user, which has some default properties. And using the permissions mix, and you can read the documentation, it adds fields and methods necessary to support the groups and permission model using the model backend, okay? And that's the default backend for users in Django. So just for now, know that we created a simple user model, okay, which we've called custom user. This guy needs to have 4 properties by default. One is the actual property that we need, which is the email. Okay, so we say this is an email field and it should be unique. And this way we basically create like a unique key. So no 2 users with the same email can join our server. And then we say we have 2 properties in here, as you saw in the manager object, is staff and is super user. They need to be Boolean properties. So we say is staff is models.boolean, and by default is false. All right, and then we have to have another property, and it is called, actually is super user is provided by default, so we don't have to do that. Then we say is active, another property that we have to define. Okay, and we say this is also a Boolean field, and by default is true. And last but not least is the property called date joined. Okay, so we say date joined, and then we say models, date time field, and then we say the default of this guy should be, let's go in here and we say from Django utils import time zone, and the default value for this guy should be time zone now. All right, so now we have our 4 properties on this guy. Password, you don't have to define, because password is something that Django will manage for us. Okay, so you don't have to specify that. It will just be set by Django. But these properties you need to basically define on your user model. We're going to use these soon. Okay. Then there are 2 properties you need to set on this user model as well. One is called a username field, and the other one is called required fields. And our username field, which is this guy, okay, needs to be equal to email, because for us the username field from this point on is going to be email, is not going to be the username field anymore. So email is going to be our username going forward. Okay, and then there's another property which is called required fields, and this property, you may think that, oh, email is required, so I'm just going to put it here, but you can't do that. The email the username field is by default required, so you cannot add it to the required fields property. Okay, so that's how we do it. The next thing, actually almost the last thing, is we need to go ahead and set our manager. So we have the model object. We need to just tell it that it needs to be managed by this manager. So we go ahead and we say objects, all right, and we say custom user manager, and we will import it as well. So from users, the user's application managers, import custom user manager, which is set in here in our objects, okay? And last but not least, we need to specify the string representation of any user, and we say def str self, and then we just return self email. So when we look at our admin console later at users, for every user, we're going to be represented with that person's email address rather than just saying user 1, user 2, etc. Okay, so that's really good. We now have the manager and the model. However, we need to now go ahead and register this model for Django. So we've created the model object, but Django's admin site has no idea that this user needs to be available in the admin console. So let's go into Explorer and then open users applications admin py, and let's register our custom user in here. So we say admin.site.register, okay, and we register our custom user, and let's import this guy like this. All right. So, and we can remove this from here. So we basically register this custom user with our admin site. All right. And this only allows us to manipulate custom users from the admin interface. Really good. Now that we have that, we need to go into our settings py in here, and we need to actually first register this user's application in here, because if you remember, every application that we create in Django, it needs to actually be registered with Django to be available for use. And as you saw, we created an application called products, and this is how we've added it to our installed applications. However, now we've created an application called users, but that is not available to Django. So Django has no idea that it actually exists. Okay, let's go ahead and register that. So we say users.apps.usersconfig. And if you're wondering where this is coming from, it is coming from, if you go to our users, there is a file in here called apps. You see apps in here and apps in here. And in here, it says usersconfig, and you can go in here and you can see usersconfig is available in here. So this is pretty much just setting up your application for Django, and this is installing it. Okay, good. After doing this, we also need to go ahead and register our user model. So let's go ahead in here and add a new key, and this key is called auth, like this, user model. And this is something that you will learn by reading the documentation. So this settings.py is made out of many keys. You can see there's like use time zone, static URL, etc., etc. And then you can add media URL. And this auth user model is the global setting that tells Django what user model it should use for the entire backend. Okay, so by setting auth user model to our users.customUser, Django will try to go into the user's app and then extract a class called customUser and use it everywhere for its user model. Okay, really good. Now we've set that up. Now we're gonna get to a little bit of a boring and the scary part, and that is migrating to our new database. You see, the way our database is set up right now is not able to cope with the changes that we've made. You may try to make your migrations, and then you do your migrations, and whatever you do, you'll see that you will get a lot of errors, and you can try to like delete your migrations table from the database, but that won't suffice either. We've just made too many changes right now to our applications or to our project in general for Django to be able to handle the migrations for us. So what we need to do is to log into Postgres and pretty much drop our table and recreate it. Okay, so let's go and open a terminal. So I'm going to open a terminal in here. Boof. And then let's increase the size. Okay, so let's go ahead and connect to Postgres. It was a while ago we did this, so the syntax may be a little bit strange to you, but we usually write PSQL. We specify our user full stack course, and by default, this will connect to not only it will actually use this user to connect to a table, a database called full stack course. Since we already have the full stack course database, we don't have to specify the database in here, like saying like this. But if you've specified a different database and you didn't follow the instructions from the beginning of this course, then you need to specify your database in here, okay? But for those of you who followed all the instructions up to this point, this should suffice. So we just connect now, okay? And then you can say /c to get your connection information. You can see that we're connected to the full stack course database as the same user, which we specified in here, okay? And if you say /list, we get our databases, but if you say DT, you get a list of your tables. You can see that these are the tables that have already been created in our database. So what we need to do is to go ahead and drop this database. However, you cannot drop a database that you're already connected to. So if you say /l, we need to first connect to some other database, okay, such as Postgres. So let's see /c, and then we connect to Postgres instead, okay? And then we say drop database full stack course. So this is very important. And then a semicolon at the end, all right? So like that. After doing that, we can go ahead and now and delete some other stuff from our project for this whole migration to actually work. Let's close all these files that we have open. Then what you need to do is to go into your users application, look at migrations, okay? And let's just delete this. We then go into products and look at migrations and delete it. And let's see if we have migrations anywhere else. We don't have it in our backend. So we pretty much just have backend products and users, okay? And those had the migrations folder, which you should delete by this point, all right? Then what we need to do is to go back to Postgres and recreate our database. So we say create database, full stack course, and we say the owner is also full stack course user, okay? Like this. Then after doing that, we go back to Visual Studio Code and ensure that our products and users have empty migrations, all right? Because without that, Django just doesn't understand what has happened. So let's right click on products folder and we say new file and we say migrations as the folder and then underscore init underscore dot, underscore, so 2, then init, then 2 underscores dot py. This is how you create an empty migrations module, basically. And then you can close that file. So that was for products, okay? Then we go into users and we right click, new file, and we say migrations / underscore init underscore dot py. So it does the exact same thing and create an empty migrations module for the users application as well, okay? After having done all of this, we should now be able to go in Visual Studio Code inside a terminal window in here or inside a shell and make our migrations. So we say make migrations, okay, like this. And you can see new migrations have been created. And then we say migrate. All right, so it seems like our migrations went successful and the tables were actually created successfully as well. So if you go in here, into our database, we are at the moment connected to Postgres. So let's connect back to full stack course database. So we say /c, connect to full stack course. And then we say DT, and then you can see all the tables have been created afresh by Django in here by running our migrations, okay? So that was really good. It means that we have now succeeded in creating the migrations and our database is back up. However, we pretty much nuked our database. So we don't have our products, we don't have our product categories, and all of those makers, not all of those, both makers, OnePlus and iPhone makers are gone from our database, but we're gonna soon create them. Before we do that, we need to go ahead and create now a super user, because just like all our content from the database is gone, so are the users as well. We had one user created so far, and that was the admin user. If you remember, I think we call it admin@admin.com. And the username was actually admin and the password was also admin. But right now we're going to go ahead and create a new super user. Okay, so let's go ahead in here and we say Python manage.py and we say create super user. Okay, and it says now email. You see, this is the result of what we've done. Previously, it asked us for a username. However, since now we have a custom user model, it asks for email. And that's simply because if you go to models inside users, you can see that the required field is email. That's why Django is asking for the required field. Okay, so in here, what we could do, we could say admin@admin.com. So this is going to be our user, this is going to be our email, and then immediately ask for a password. So it doesn't ask for a username. This suffices as a username. Okay, and the password we're going to set as admin. Repeat the password. Excuse me. It's going to say, well, it's too weak. Do you really want to create it? Then we say yes. And now our super user has been created. What we can do after this is to go ahead and run our server and see if everything works as expected. So we say run server. You can see our server is running without problem. Then I will open up a new window in here, which you cannot see, and I'll bring it up here. So I went to localhost 8000 admin. All right. And in here, you can see our form now is asking for an email and a password, not a username and password anymore. So we say admin@admin.com, and then the password is also admin. We log in and we save the password. So now you can see we've logged into our Django administration portal in here, and we have our makers, product categories, and products as well in here. And this is our custom users, okay, which is admin@admin. All right. So seems like that part is working really well. And the last thing that we need to do in this video is to go ahead and add our products again. So let's go to this admin and go into our products. Okay, actually, let's go to the categories. So we're going to add a category and we're going to call it electronics. And for the icon URL, we're not going to add anything in here. And for descriptions, we say electronics. Okay, and then it doesn't have a parent category, and we save it. Save and add another. So electronics is added, and then we say cell phones. Okay, so this is our cell phones category. It doesn't have an icon, and then we say telephone, or just cell phones. And as its parent category, then we say it's electronics. Okay, and we save this guy. So now we have two categories, basically product categories. So if you go in here, you can see cell phones and electronics. Okay. Now that we have the product categories, we have to go ahead and add our products. So we go and add a product and we say plus in here. Okay, let's go to Best Buy again. And in here, let's say that we're in the United States. It doesn't really matter, but we probably get a better selection if we're in the United States. And let's just say iPhone 14 Pro Max. Okay, so we now add iPhone 14 Pro Max. Previously, we had added iPhone 13 Pro, I think, or 13 Pro Max. So let's go in here and take this as it is, and I'm just gonna copy this name like in here and paste it in the title. For the subtitle, let's just take space black Verizon. Okay, and the maker, we are gonna create a new one, so you can just immediately create a maker by pressing this plus button, and the maker in this case is gonna be Apple. Okay, and save it. Boom. And the images, I think we did it like this. We clicked on this one, took the image, and we just like copy image address. So we take the first image. Then let's go ahead and take the next image as well. Okay. Copy image address like this. And then we take the third image. So this is something that we've done before as well. We don't have to repeat it. And then we go to the fourth image. Okay. Like this. And then the price, we just say 1,000 perhaps. Okay, and then we say it's American dollars, and there is no version product IDs, and we say save and add another. Okay, then let's go ahead and take another phone in here. Let's say OnePlus. Okay, 10T perhaps would be a good telephone to add in here. So we have a 10 Pro. Let's just take the 10 Pro. Doesn't really matter. Then we say we copy this as its title. All right. And for the subtitle, we take Volcanic Black unlocked. All right. And then the maker is going to be a new maker. So let's press the plus button in here. So I'm just going to say plus, and let's say OnePlus is the maker. Okay. And we save it. Let's take the images in here, and I'm going to click on it. Let's just say copy image address. Okay. Like this. Let's take the next image and then copy image address in here as well. Then we go to the third image, okay? And we say copy image address if we can. Oops, here. I don't know what here. Okay, it's working now. I think I was just clicking outside the image. And for the fourth image, we're gonna say right click and copy image address as well. Okay. And price also, we're going to say 1,000, and currency is American dollar, and there is no variation to this product. Okay. So we just say save. And that was it really. So now we have our products as we did before, as you can see in here, and we should still be able to hit our APIs without problem. So let's test that as well. So we say localhost 8000 products slash, you can see our products are served. Makers are expanded to the depth of 1, as we saw in the previous video as well. And I think we also had categories, and those are working as well. All right. And also I think we had makers. So makers are also working as expected. So now that we're done with this, I think there's just one more thing that we have to do. We say git log, and we see step 4. So let's say git add all, and then we say git commit step 5. And as the description, we say add custom user model with required email field. All right. After having done this, then we can push our changes, and we could pretty much just say that we're done with this particular video. Now that we have created a custom user model with email and password, we can go ahead and in the next video work with providing our users that want to sign up to our application with custom registration backend or endpoint, logging in endpoint and logging out endpoints as well. And using those, then we're gonna provide those users with JWT tokens. So it's gonna be their auth tokens that we're gonna provide to them, so that our Flutter application later in this course and the Rust application, or whoever wants to connect to our backend, can call those endpoints and register a user or log in with a user and retrieve a token in order to work with our backend. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you in the next one.